So I thought I'd just make a quick video about computer storage, digital storage, as it's something that we all use every day. There are many other videos about this you can watch, I'm sure, but this is my video. I want to start off with this format, which is common or garden cassette tape, familiar to many of you. This started to be used in home computers in the 1970s. Of course, before this there were variants which were much more sophisticated, which were used by these bigger computers made by IBM, for example. So they started to use magnetic tape, which is what this is, back in the 1950s, I think it was. And then in the 1970s, electronics was being developed so that they could utilise ordinary cassette tape for computer storage. And here you can see the magnetic tape. There is a plastic leader, and then the darker tape is where it's got ferric oxide on it, which stores the information. Now, this is just a single game which I got in the 1980s, I think probably 1986, 1985, sometime like that, when I had a ZX Spectrum. That's what you used to use for storage then. But around that time as well, in the 80s, we moved on to this format, floppy disk. Here's some later examples. And this also uses a magnetic storage, as many of these formats do, and you can see that in here. And there are a number of variants of the floppy disk format. It's one of the longest lasting currently formats that we used in home computing. These are high density disks that store 1.44 megabytes of information. 1.44 megabytes, that's a million bytes. Now, going back to the cassette, that would store, this particular cassette would only store about 40 kilobytes, something like that on each side, because it's a very short cassette there that you can see with a very small amount of tape. If you were to get a C90 tape, that would store something like about 720 kilobytes, something like that. So these would store as much information as two whole C90 cassettes about that time back in the 1980s. But floppy disks were initially very expensive. By the time they were falling out of usage, you could get packets for about £3 or £4, something like that, for a pack of 10. So they were quite cheap. But also in the 1980s, we started to move on to what are called hard drives, which many of you are familiar with. So this is an example from 2009, and this is very much bigger storage. This is 1.4 terabytes approximately. So that's 1,400 gigabytes, which is, so it's an enormous amount of storage. And the electronics here, you can see, which controls the drive. I don't know all the electronics, how it all operates, but there's basically, as you'll see in a moment, a motor inside this which spins a disc, and then the disc is read with a head. And here I've got a smaller hard drive. If you look, this is the 3.5 inch size, and it's about the same size as a floppy disk, as you can see on the width of it. And this is the 2.5 inch size, which I've taken apart. So even though it's about a third or a quarter of the volume of this larger one here, this will store about a third of the information, so it's much more densely packed in here. And what these look like inside, if you were to take them apart, this is I haven't got all the bits here, but this is one I pulled apart a few years ago. You've got this disc here, which spins at high speed, and there is a head which is attached to this thing here, and that reads the information. So this is again, we explained in lots of other videos, and then the information is essentially read out of that port there, which is called a SATA port, and goes in and out of your computer, and it's actually stored on these. I don't know whether these are. I think these are glass or metal, but I can get this out because it's not attached. So here's one of the hard drive disks, and the little head stores the information in magnetic domains on the disk there, and so it's a very dense format. And now in 2018 we've got this, which is the hard drive I've got for my computer, and this is a 4 terabyte version. Let it focus on that. This is actually a Seagate 4 terabyte. 4 terabytes is 4,000 gigabytes, and a gigabyte is a billion bytes. So that's 4,000 billion bytes of information, and that can store. And you could record on one of these drives about 20 years continuous play of MP3, 20 years. So if you had about 3 of these, you could record approximately a whole lifetime, 70 years worth, on about 3 of these if you recorded it in a fairly low bit rate. That's how much these things will now store, and as you can see, I can hold this in the palm of my hand.